Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting day. Today, the 27th day of July 2023. Hey, it's about 17 degrees, and which is a near record. Right now, it is a little bit cloudy right here in Brisbane, so it's not bright and sunny. It was a chilly morning. Well, first of all, let's get to the news today. Number one, Anthony Albanese and Chris Hopkins are holding talks in New Zealand.
Escaping the chill of Wellington's windy winter air, local Maori custodians welcome their trans-Tasman guest. The warmest of embraces reserved for the closest of friends.
It's great to be able to formally welcome you here to the New Zealand Parliament.
There are no two countries in the world that are closer than Australia and New Zealand.
2023 marks 50 years since the Trans-Tasman travel arrangement was put in place, allowing freedom of movement between the two countries for their citizens. Relaxing the rules even further, a possibility, just not right now.
We haven't looked at a Trans-Tasman passport. What we are looking at, though, is making a seamless experience.
We've asked that working group to report back by the 30th of June next year.
The leaders' gaze lifting to their neighbours in the Pacific, trying to steer small island states away from China's overtures.
When Australia provides aid and support to our neighbours, there aren't strings attached. We do that because we are part of the Pacific family.
Matters of family closer to home may be difficult issues for friends to discuss.
The referendum in Australia is a matter for the Australian people.
But New Zealand's leader believes his country's own experiences, recognising First Nations, can be instructive for Australia.
Many people would look back on them and wonder what was so controversial about them, because, the reconciliation process has ultimately been very positive.
The referendum still months away. For now, more immediate concerns.
While the two leaders have been keen to spruik the deep ties between Australia and New Zealand today, nothing symbolises that more at this very moment than the fact that they are co-hosting the FIFA Women's Football World Cup. Anthony Albanese and Chris Hopkins even managing to sit down and share a beer after a day of talks.
I wish you all the best, unless we play each other.
That's right.
A strong bond, only tested by white line fever. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Wellington.
And the trans-Tasman relationship has always been there and never so strong. And it is so wonderful to see both the Prime Minister sitting and having a beer at the end of the day. Yeah, that is all about mateship, mate. That's the way to do it. Well, right now, let's take a look at the situation on the RBA rate hikes and what it might mean for common day people.
It's a bit of a mixed bag with this release, because that 6.0% inflation figure that we got today is lower than the RBA's forecast from just a month or so ago of 6.3%. So that's good news, because it means that inflation is falling slightly faster than the RBA had anticipated. But as you showed just before, this new 6% figure of inflation is still double the upper range of the RBA's target band for inflation. So it's still far too high. So there is still definitely a chance of an interest rate rise next week, although on the positive side of things, inflation is falling down and slightly faster than the RBA has anticipated. So I'd say it's a close one to call next week. But as we've seen so far, the RBA has been very, very determined to bring down this inflation and not have it be higher for longer. So there's still a chance of a rate rise next week.
Yeah, so we look at those inflation figures, and the basic summary you gave us there, that's still too high, though they are falling. But as an economist, what are you zoning in on a day like today when they're released at this time?
So I'm zoning in on what's contributing to this inflation figure. And we've now almost got this two-speed inflation. So we've got goods inflation and then we've got services inflation. And on the goods side of things, that's what drove the earlier peak in the inflation rate. And that's now what's driving the inflation rate coming down. And when I talk about goods there, that's things like petrol as well as prices of clothing and food. But now that fortunately goods inflation is pulling off, we're seeing services inflation actually pick up, and services inflation is now at its highest rate since when GST was introduced more than 20 years ago, and that's really concerning. So we're seeing services inflation across the board, but particularly strong price growth in relation to rents, and also coming from insurance premiums. There's really large growth in that, adding to inflation this quarter. So it's that split between goods inflation and services inflation that we're seeing really diverge at the moment, and that services inflation continuing to grow is a piece of evidence that that might encourage the RBA to increase rates next week.
Stephen Smith from Deloitte today said that today's figures show that the excessive inflation is due to the supply side, so factors largely out of our control, and that shows that interest rates have already been lifted too far. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that in principle. So I think it's right that the inflation we've got at the moment is really supply side driven versus demand, whereas interest rate rises try to bring down inflation by reducing our demand. And so that means in the current environment where inflation is really being driven up by high supply, you have to push demand down and really hard and really suppress it if you want to balance out high supply with interest rates and try to bring inflation down that way. So I think there is probably a fair argument to make that the amount of interest rate rises we've seen so far in such quick succession may be doing harm to the economy, and we just don't have the data yet based on the lag in which that harm might operate to know if we've already gone too far.
So have we gone too far? As we know that rising the interest rate, decreases the demand, and so that brings in control the inflation. Well, that is in theory. What actually happens is a slightly different matter as well. But right now, it's a very, very, tight balancing act, I would say. You try and, just quick fix things by paperwork or by putting these equations in rather than what's actually happening on the ground. What are people feeling? What are people doing things as well? On paper, you can make lots of things, regulations, this and that, you can do that. But the ground reality, as they reckon, is something else to be looked at. Well, right now, let's take a look at our young ones, the kids these days. They seem to be, developing a lot of diseases quite young, even asthma. So what is it that's got, contributing? What are the contributing factors? We have noticed that lately there are so many chronic illnesses in our young ones.
New research has found that food allergies in early childhood can increase the risk of asthma and reduce lung capacity in later life. Here's Associate Professor Rachel Peters from the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Hi there, Rachel. Good to see you. So what sort of ages are we talking about here? When you say food allergies in early childhood, how early is that?
So in this particular study, we measured food allergy in 1-year-old children, and we've been following this cohort of children as they grow up. And in this study, again, then we've measured asthma and lung function at 6 years of age.
So if children have food allergies when they're babies, you say that they can get into problems with asthma and reduced lung capacity by the time they're 6. Were you surprised at the result when it came to reduced lung capacity?
Yes, so we found that babies who had a food allergy were more likely to develop asthma and had reduced lung function at 6 years of age compared to babies who didn't have an allergy. And this was the case even if they had outgrown their food allergies. So the link with food allergy and asthma has been previously described, but we are one of the first studies to look at the link between food allergy and lung function, and we were quite surprised by these findings.
Do we know what links the two?
With regards to food allergy and asthma, they're both common allergies, so there are similar immune mechanisms at play. With lung function though, so children's lung function and growth is directly related to their height. And we've also found in our research that children who have food allergies tend to be shorter and lighter than children who don't have an allergy. So it could be that the reduced growth associated with food allergy is also having an impact on their lung development. And so we would encourage our children who have allergies that their families may want to consider seeing a dietitian to make sure that their diet is being well managed.
All right. Is there a link then between severity of the food allergies and how serious the asthma or the reduced lung capacity could be later?
Look, that's an excellent question, but we didn't directly address it in our research, so I'm afraid I can't give you an answer.
Okay. So how does knowing about this increased risk of asthma help young children and the doctors who are looking after them?
So we really hope that these findings will help create greater awareness among both parents and clinicians and encourage them to keep a close eye on the respiratory health of children with allergies. This will help children receive a timely diagnosis and also help to ensure that appropriate treatment and management strategies are in place.
What are the rates of food allergy among Australian babies at the moment? Are they going up?
We have seen an increase over the last several decades. Our findings from Health Nuts show that around 10% of babies in Melbourne actually have a food allergy, although we do know that some of these children will outgrow their food allergies as they age. So approximately 90% of egg allergy had resolved by age 6 and around 30% of peanut allergy resolves.
But still, even though those food allergies have resolved, you said that they're still at increased risk of developing asthma.
Yes, that's right.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. You are what you eat, as they reckon. So, it is very, very important that we maintain a good, healthy, balanced diet. Now, also talking about diet, we know that many of the food items that we consume today, which are supposed to have nutritional value, is not quite the same as what it used to be. Meaning there are many ways of growing crops even these days, vegetables that are going through a rapid process with fertilizers and things like that. They will look the same, feel the same, but many times the actual substance in it is not quite that of an organic farm. And same thing with the produce and the meat, etc. as well. Is the way that they are processed and the way in even the animals, the way in which they are bred and slaughtered these days is quite different to what it used to be. So even though you would be having your traditional foods which were high in value such as protein, bodybuilding, energy giving, etc. But you also need to be mindful that in today's day and environment, you need to be very, very careful of the things that you are eating. If by chance you can get organic farm produce, that is by far the best. But once again, there is a price that people pay for that. If you're looking at all the organically grown produce, vegetables, etc., you will be you wouldn't be going to Woolies for sure, or Coles for that matter, because none of these fast food super chains will have those organic things. They are only available in specialist shops. But if you are that way inclined, things are available. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's food for thought. Right now, as we know, the news has come out that there's a slowing of the inflation. What has the Federal Treasurer, our good friend Jim Chalmers, has to say?
Inflation's moderating in our economy in welcome ways and for a range of reasons. Obviously, tighter interest rates is part of the story, but also from a government point of view, what we've been able to do is to roll out a 3-point plan here, which is helping in the fight against inflation. We've got a bigger surplus to take some of the pressure off inflation. We're rolling out this cost of living relief in a way that takes the edge off cost of living pressures without adding to inflation. And we're also investing in the supply side of the economy. So there are a whole range of reasons for this. We know that we've still got a long way to go. We know that people are still under the pump. But what we see in today's numbers represents, I think, some welcome progress. Inflation is still too high, but it's heading in the right direction.
Is it mission accomplished on the monetary policy side, the interest rate side, at least for now?
Well, I think, as you know, Greg, we've spoken on a number of occasions over the years, and I'm not going to get into preempting the deliberations and the decisions of the Independent Reserve Bank. They will weigh up this inflation data today, which was a bit better than the market certainly expected. They'll weigh that up against all of the other issues in the global economy and the domestic economy as well.
Yeah.
My job isn't to give them free advice. My job is to focus on rolling out this cost of living help, which is the government's overwhelming focus at a time where inflation is still high, even though it's moderating in these welcome ways.
All right, well, let's drill into some of the numbers. Services inflation as opposed to goods. Highest growth in 20 years. This is whether it's for pet care or eating out or rolling rents into the equation as well. The Bureau says it's contributing to these stronger wages growth. Why is this not a sign of some pressure coming onto prices from wages?
Well, I think clearly that the composition of this inflation challenge is changing, and we see that in today's figures. But all of those that you just mentioned a moment ago, Greg, I think the one that is the most concerning is rent. And that's why we've got the biggest increase in rent assistance in 30 years rolling out very soon. It's why we're trying to build more public housing, more social, more affordable housing with our Public Housing Accelerator and our Housing Australia Future Fund. We've got to get much more housing supply into the system. It's got to be more affordable when it comes to rent. And so of all of those categories that you just mentioned, for understandable reasons, I think rent is the one that we need to be most focused on, and rent is the one that we're very focused on when it comes to our cost of living relief package.
Is there a strong likelihood that these rental price pressures haven't actually peaked yet because of the lag that follows interest rate increases in particular?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, I'm obviously aware of the sorts of predictions that get made about these rental pressures. They've been with us for some time. They are as much a consequence of not enough supply as any other reason, and that's why we've got this broad and ambitious housing policy, which is all about building more affordable homes at the same time as we make it easier for people to pay the rent, with the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance in 30 years. But obviously, rent is a big part of the inflation story. It's obviously a concerning part of the numbers that we saw today. Overwhelmingly, overall, the inflation picture is getting a bit better in our economy in welcome ways, but that doesn't mean every single part of our economy is out of the woods, and rent is obviously one of those things that we're most focused on.
So they were our very hard-working treasurer, so busy. I think it's time for a trip to the barbers. Their treasurer. But I think the point he made on the rental, yes, of course, that is one area of concern, and that is one area which he mentioned that the government is looking at. That is one of the key focus areas, as he mentioned. But the good news is that the inflation seems to be under control or slowing at this point in time. Well, let's finish up on that high note for today. Let's go to our functions and events. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you in this segment. Hey, it's been wonderful having your company. Just a little bit heads up, there might not be any shows this weekend, beginning from tomorrow until Tuesday. Sort of a bit of a break, but there will be plenty to watch on our YouTube and Facebook channels, with some wonderful previous episodes. We might be playing some of the special interviews as well, especially that interview from SCED. We're raising funds for the much needed funds for the newly acquired land as the contract needs to be signed. So if you are able, please do support that movement. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye until the next show.